In today's video, I'm going to tell you a story that kept me awake for weeks. Every week, always on the same day, my neighbor Carlos sneaks out of his house in the middle of the night without his wife knowing. And girls, what I discovered about this will completely shock you. Don't look away because the ending of this story is absolutely surprising and will change everything you're thinking right now. Here on the channel, every week I bring you the most incredible gossip and stories I see through my window, behind those curtains that are silent witnesses to so many neighborhood secrets. And today, this story I'm going to share with you is one of the most intriguing I've ever witnessed. Before we begin, I need you to do something very important to me. Like this video, subscribe to the channel to be notified every time I post a new gossip story. And please leave a comment telling me what you think is happening. You have no idea how much I love reading your opinions. But before I begin today's story, I always like to give a special tip to those of you who follow me. I've pinned some incredible resources in the first comment that can transform your life. They're ebooks on a variety of topics that can be incredibly helpful, from healthcare and well-being to special recipes and even advice on faith and spirituality. Just click the link I pinned in the comments to download them and help both the channel and yourself. Now, let's get to the point, girls. This story began about 3 months ago, one Monday morning. I've always been an early riser. You know how it is. As you get older, your sleep becomes lighter. I was in my kitchen making my early morning tea when I heard a strange noise outside. Look, I've lived in this house for over 20 years. I know every sound in this neighborhood, every car that passes, every person who walks on the sidewalk. So when I hear something different, especially at this time of day, my curiosity is immediately piqued. It was around 4:30 in the morning when I heard a door close very slowly, as if someone was trying not to make any noise. You know how it is, that sound of someone trying to be discreet, but which ends up attracting even more attention. I went to the living room window, opened the curtains a crack, always very careful not to be seen, of course. And that's when I saw Carlos, my neighbor from the yellow house across the street, coming out of the garage door. Girls, he was sneaking around his own house like a thief. Carlos is a man in his early 40s, always very respectful and quick to greet. The kind of neighbor you have no complaints about. Married to Maria for at least 15 years, they've always seemed like a relaxed couple, without many apparent problems. But there, that early morning, there was something very strange about his behavior. He looked around, checked for anyone on the street, and tiptoed to his car. Oh man, tiptoeing. A grown man tiptoeing in his own garage. And the most suspicious thing, he didn't start the car there. He pushed the car out of the garage, closed the gate very slowly, and only after he was outside did he start the engine. Ladies, this is not the behavior of someone doing something normal. Do you agree? I stood there, watching through the crack in the curtain, my heart racing. My mind was already racing. You know, women have a sixth sense for these things, and all the possibilities started racing through my head. The first thing I thought of, lover. Forgive me for being blunt, but that's exactly what came to mind. A married man sneaking out of his wife's house in the middle of the night? What other explanation could there be? But then I thought, wait, Ruth, it could be work. Maybe he got a new job, a night shift, and he doesn't want to wake Maria. It could be that, right? However, something in my gut told me otherwise. The way he behaved, all that exaggerated care not to make noise, didn't seem like the behavior of someone who was simply going to work. I returned to the kitchen, but I couldn't sit back and enjoy my tea. I kept thinking about the scene I'd just witnessed. Did Maria know? Was she sound asleep and unaware her husband had left? The next morning, I met Maria at the gate as she was leaving for work. She seemed normal, greeted me as usual, commented on the weather, and complained a bit about the traffic. Nothing to indicate anything was different at home. "Maria," I said casually, "wasn't Carlos home earlier today? I saw a car that looked like his leaving in the early hours of the morning." She looked at me blankly. "That's strange, Ruth. Carlos slept at home all night. It must have been a car similar to ours. Girls, did you see? She had no idea. The wife didn't know her husband had left home in the early hours of the morning. This only confirmed my suspicions that something very wrong was going on. I spent the rest of the week observing, but Carlos maintained his normal routine. He left for work in the morning, returned in the late afternoon, watched television on the balcony. A normal couple's life. Nothing suspicious, but the following Monday came, and there I was again in the kitchen, sipping my early morning tea. And guess what? At exactly the same time, the same ritual began to repeat itself. I heard the door slowly close again, went to the window, opened the curtain, and there was Carlos again, acting suspiciously the same way. Looking around, walking on tiptoe, pushing the car out of the garage. Girls, this wasn't a coincidence. It was a pattern, a secret routine he'd created hidden from his wife's eyes. This time I could see some details better. He was dressed more smartly than someone would wear to work. Dress pants, a neatly pressed shirt, and it even looked like he'd put on perfume. Who dresses like that for work in the wee hours of the morning? And there was one more thing. He was carrying a small travel bag. It wasn't his work briefcase. It was a brown leather bag I'd never seen him carry before. My mind was buzzing with curiosity. I began to create theories, each more elaborate than the last. Did he have a second family in another city? Did he keep a mistress somewhere and visit her religiously every week? Or then I thought of an even worse possibility. Was he involved in something illegal? Drugs, smuggling, whatever? Because all that behavior wasn't normal, girls. Nobody acts like that if they're doing something right. Throughout that week, I paid closer attention to Maria. I noticed if she seemed sad, if she showed any signs of suspicion, if their relationship showed any signs of strain. But no, she remained normal, smiling, greeting, tending the garden, welcoming friends for afternoon coffee. She seemed completely oblivious to what her husband was doing, and that made me even more worried. Because if she didn't know, it meant Carlos was being very clever in hiding whatever he was doing. And when a man becomes too clever to hide things from his wife, it's usually not to protect her, it's to protect himself. On the third Monday, I was already prepared. I set my alarm for 4 in the morning, made my tea early, and went straight to my vantage point by the living room window. And there he was again, punctual as a Swiss watch. Same time, same ritual, same suspicious behavior. But this time I noticed details I'd missed before. First, he checked his phone several times before leaving. He wasn't just checking the time. He was reading messages, replying to something. People who text someone at 4:30 in the morning, only if they're planning something secret. Second, when he pushed the car out, he looked specifically at the bedroom window where Maria was sleeping. He stood there for a few seconds, just watching, as if making sure she wouldn't wake up. Third, before getting into the car, he opened the brown bag and checked to see if everything was inside. He closed it quickly, but it was clear he had some things organized as if it were a planned trip. And the most suspicious thing of all, when he started the car, he didn't drive off straight away. He just stood there for about 2 minutes, with the car running, just staring at the house. He looked like he was saying goodbye, you know? Like someone going somewhere special. Girls, I couldn't get it out of my head. Every week, the same thing, always on Monday morning. I started taking notes, recording times, observing patterns. I discovered that he always returned on Wednesday nights around 10 o'clock. He would come home, greet Maria as usual, have dinner, watch TV, and go to sleep as if nothing had happened. In other words, he was away from home for 2 whole days, and Maria apparently had no idea. How was that possible? Was she just too naive? Or was she pretending not to know? I also began observing her behavior during those 2 days. On Tuesday and Wednesday, Maria maintained her normal routine: work, shopping, meeting up with friends. She didn't seem like a woman who was missing her husband. This made me wonder, did they have some kind of arrangement? Did she know and pretend not to? Or was Carlos so good at lying that he was able to completely fool his own wife? One thing that really caught my attention was that whenever he came back on Wednesday night, he brought flowers for Maria. Always. Every week, without exception. Red roses, usually. Now tell me, girls, what kind of man brings his wife flowers after being away for 2 days, doing who knows what? In my opinion, only someone who's feeling guilty about something. And Mariah was so happy, thanking him, and putting the flowers in the vase in the living room. She seemed genuinely surprised and pleased, as if it were a spontaneous gesture of affection. This left me torn between feeling sorry for her and being irritated by her naivete. How does a woman not notice her husband disappearing 2 days a week? How does she not find these weekly flowers strange? How does she not ask any questions? Don't look away, girls, because what I discovered next will completely surprise you. Things got weirder and weirder, and I ended up getting involved in a way I never imagined. In the 4th week of observation, I decided to risk a bolder investigation. I decided to follow Carlos, at least to see what direction he took when he left the house. I know it sounds crazy, but curiosity was consuming me. I prepared everything. I grabbed my car keys from the garage and got everything ready to leave as soon as he passed my street. Monday morning, there I was, awake since 4, waiting for the show to start. Carlos showed up at the usual time, performed that whole suspicious ritual, and when he left the street, I counted to 10 and followed him. Girls, I was as nervous as a teenager making art. My heart was pounding, my hands sweating on the steering wheel, trying to keep my distance so he wouldn't see me, but without losing sight of him. Carlos followed the main avenue, then took the road to the city center. So far, nothing too revealing. But when we got to the central area, he did something that made me even more suspicious. He stopped at a gas station, but not to fill up. He got out of the car and went straight to the bathroom. He stayed there for about 15 minutes. When he came out, he was wearing different clothes. Guys, he went into the bathroom wearing the formal clothes I'd seen him wear, and came out wearing more casual clothes, jeans and a t-shirt, and the brown bag was gone. In its place, he was carrying a black backpack. This was the height of distrust for me. Who changes clothes in a gas station bathroom? Only those who don't want to be recognized. Only those who are trying to change their identity. I continued following him, now even more certain that I was witnessing something very suspicious. Carlos followed the road to the neighboring town, driving for another 40 minutes or so, until he reached an area I didn't know very well. It was a more residential area, with smaller, simpler houses than our neighborhood. He stopped on a quiet street, in front of a small white house with a well-kept front yard. So, girls, you won't believe what I saw. Carlos got out of the car, grabbed his backpack, and walked to the front door as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He didn't even ring the doorbell or knock. He had a key. He opened the door, got in, and closed it behind him. I stood there in the car, hidden behind a tree, trying to process what I'd just seen. My neighbor had a key to a house I'd never heard him mention, in a town where he supposedly knew no one. All my theories about his lover seemed to be coming true. That house must be where he kept his other woman, his second relationship, his secret life that poor Maria had no idea existed. I watched for over an hour, but nothing happened. The house remained quiet. The curtains closed. No sign of movement. Carlos had apparently settled in and didn't intend to leave anytime soon. I returned home with my head spinning. I had just confirmed that my neighbor was leading a double life, lying to his wife and maintaining a parallel relationship in another city. And the worst part, he was so organized in this that he had created an entire routine, perfect logistics to maintain both relationships without one knowing about the other. For that entire week, I couldn't look at Maria the same way. She continued her normal life, taking care of the house, working, smiling at everyone, completely unaware that she was being betrayed in such an elaborate way. I thought about telling her several times, but how? How do you go up to a neighbor and say, "Look, Maria, I've been following your husband and discovered he has another life in a neighboring town"? Besides, I wasn't entirely sure. Maybe that house belonged to some relative of his I hadn't met. Maybe there was an innocent explanation for all of this. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that. My feminine intuition was screaming that Carlos was cheating on Maria in the cruelest way possible, systematically, in an organized way, lying to her face every week. The following Monday, I couldn't resist returning to that town. This time, I didn't follow Carlos. I went straight to the White House I'd seen him enter. I wanted to observe for longer, try to uncover more clues about what was really going on there. I arrived around 9 in the morning and parked in a strategic position where I could see the house without being seen. The street was quiet, with few people passing by, perfect for discreet observation. That's when I saw something that shocked me even more. Carlos came out of the house, but not alone. He was accompanied by an elderly woman with gray hair who walked with difficulty, leaning on a cane. Girls, you have no idea how shocked I was to see that scene. Carlos leaving the house with an elderly woman, helping her walk, with all the care in the world. My mind was racing, trying to understand what was happening. At first, I thought, could this be the lover's mother? Could Carlos not only be keeping a second wife, but also taking care of his secret mother-in-law? Man, the situation was getting more and more complicated in my head. I watched them walk slowly down the sidewalk. Carlos was extremely attentive to the woman, gently holding her arm, adjusting her cane when needed, and whispering in her ear. He seemed genuinely concerned about her well-being. They walked to a different car than the one Carlos had arrived in. It was a smaller, simpler car, parked right in front of the house. He helped the woman in, placed his cane on the back seat, and they left together. I stood there, processing this information. If Carlos was keeping a mistress, why would he be caring for an elderly woman? And why would he change cars? None of this made sense in my previous theories. I decided to follow them again. I kept my distance, but I could see that they were headed to a hospital in the central area of the neighboring city. Carlos parked right next to the main entrance, helped the woman out, and together they entered the area that appeared to be for medical consultations. Now I was completely confused. Hospital, doctor's appointment. This didn't fit at all with the mistress theory I'd constructed in my head. I waited outside for almost 2 hours. When they came out, the lady seemed more tired. Carlos was carrying a bag from the hospital pharmacy, and the two of them were talking very intimately, like people who had known each other for a long time. What caught my attention most was the way Carlos looked at that woman. It wasn't the look of someone fulfilling an obligation. It was a look of genuine affection, of genuine concern, the way a son looks at his mother. They returned to the White House, and I accompanied them. Carlos helped the lady inside, carried all the bags, and stayed inside for a few more hours. When he emerged around 2 in the afternoon, he was visibly tired, but he didn't look like someone who had just found a lover. He looked like someone who had completed an important but exhausting mission. I returned home with even more questions than answers. If she wasn't a mistress, who was that woman? Why was Carlos hiding her from Maria? Why all that secrecy? All that complicated logistics? For the rest of the week, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I started observing Carlos differently when he was home. I paid attention to whether he seemed tired, stressed, or worried about something. And indeed, he seemed different. More pensive. Sometimes he'd stand on the porch, just staring at the horizon, as if preoccupied with something important. Other times I'd see him on the phone talking quietly, always when Maria wasn't around. On Tuesday night when he returned home, he brought Maria the usual flowers. But this time, I noticed his expression as he handed her the roses. There was something melancholy in his gaze, as if those flowers represented more than just a simple gesture of affection. And Maria, poor thing, still didn't understand a thing. She received the flowers with the same smile as always, kissed her husband, and asked how his day at work was. Carlos replied that it had been normal, but I knew there was nothing normal about the whole thing. I also started paying attention to the conversations they had on the porch in the late afternoon. I'd sit in my kitchen with the window ajar, trying to catch bits of their conversation. One night I heard Maria saying, "Carlos, you've been acting a little strange lately. Quieter, more thoughtful. Is something going on at work?" And his answer left me even more intrigued. "No, love. It's just tiredness. Sometimes life takes its toll on us in ways we don't expect." Girls, what was that mysterious answer? Life takes its toll on us? This only confirmed that there was something very important going on in Carlos's life, something he couldn't share with his wife. The following week, I decided to try a different approach. Instead of following Carlos or observing from afar, I decided to investigate who the elderly woman was. I returned to the neighboring town, but this time on a Thursday, when I knew Carlos wouldn't be there. I went straight to the White House and began a more thorough investigation of the neighborhood. I chatted with a few people on the street, introduced myself as someone looking for a house to rent in the area, and subtly asked about the White House. That's when I learned some valuable information. The owner of the house was Donna Elena, a woman in her 70s who had lived alone for several years. Neighbors said she had some health problems and that she received regular visits from a family member, but they didn't know exactly who she was. "Oh yes," said a neighbor. "A young man always comes to look after her. Very attentive, very polite. I think he's her son or grandson. She's very happy when he comes." "Der son or grandson?" This information completely changed my perspective on the situation. If Donna Elena were related to Carlos, it would explain all the dedication, all the care, all the hospital visits. But it still didn't explain why he would hide this from Maria. Why would a man hide from his wife that he was caring for a sick relative? It didn't make sense unless there was some family complication I wasn't aware of. I decided to risk a direct conversation with Donna Elena. I rang the doorbell of the White House on a Thursday afternoon, introduced myself as Carlos's neighbor, and said I was worried because he seemed very tired. Donna Elena received me with suspicion at first, but when I mentioned Carlos's name, her face lit up in a way that left no doubt about the affection she felt for him. "Ah, Carlos," she said with a weak smile. "He's an angel in my life. I don't know what I would do without him." We talked for about 20 minutes, and little by little I began to understand the situation better. Donna Elena had serious health problems, had been undergoing cancer treatment for over a year, and required constant monitoring during appointments and chemotherapy sessions. "He comes here every week," she told me, "takes me to the hospital, stays with me throughout my treatment, buys my medicine, takes care of everything. He's like my own son." But when I asked about their relationship, Donna Elena was a bit evasive. She simply said that Carlos was a very special person in her life, but didn't elaborate on how they met or what their exact relationship was. I returned home with important information, but still with many missing pieces of the puzzle. Carlos was indeed caring for a sick woman. That much was clear. But why would he hide it from his wife? Why all that pretense, all that secrecy? Would Maria not approve? Was there some problem between her and Donna Elena? Or did Carlos think his wife wouldn't understand the time and money he spent caring for that woman? I began to see the situation from a completely new perspective. Maybe Carlos wasn't the villain I'd imagined. Maybe he was a man trying to balance two important responsibilities: caring for his wife and caring for someone who needed him. But still the lie kept bothering me. No matter how good his intentions, Carlos was lying to Maria, creating a parallel life, disappearing 2 days a week without explanation. And that got me thinking, haven't all of us women been through similar situations? Don't our husbands, our partners, also have their little secrets, their hidden responsibilities, their worries that they prefer not to share with us? The following Monday, I returned to my observation post at the window. I wanted to see Carlos differently, now that I knew he was caring for a sick person, not meeting a lover. And indeed, when I saw him leaving the house that morning, his entire body language seemed different to me. It was no longer the behavior of someone who was doing something wrong. It was the behavior of someone carrying a weight, a difficult responsibility. The way he looked at the window of the room where Maria slept also took on a different meaning. It wasn't guilt over cheating. It was the sadness of someone who wished they could share that burden with their loved one, but for some reason couldn't. And the bag he carried every week? Probably clean clothes, medicine, maybe some special food for Dona Elena. It all made sense now, but the reason for the secrecy still didn't make sense. Throughout that week, I paid even closer attention to Carlos and Maria's conversations. I wanted to understand if there was any clue as to why he wasn't telling her about Dona Elena. It was on a Thursday afternoon that I finally heard something revealing. Maria was talking to a neighbor right at her gate about an acquaintance who was caring for her sick mother-in-law. "Poor Sonia," Maria said. "Her mother-in-law has cancer, and she spends all day in the hospital. Her husband can barely work properly because he has to help out. What a difficult situation, isn't it?" And then she finished with a sentence that made me understand everything. "It's a good thing I don't have in-laws to take care of. We already have enough responsibilities. Imagine having to take care of sick people. It must be terribly exhausting." There you go. There was the explanation I was looking for. Maria had a negative view of caring for sick relatives, thinking it was a terrible burden, an added responsibility she didn't want to have. Carlos probably knew his wife's opinion and decided to spare her the burden. Rather than create conflict or arguments at home, he chose to take on the responsibility of caring for Dona Elena, alone, even if it meant lying and creating complicated logistics. Now I could see the situation from a completely different perspective. Carlos wasn't an unfaithful husband. He was a man trying to protect both his wife and a loved one who depended on him, even if it cost him his peace of mind and his marital integrity. But girls, I want to hear your opinion. Was Carlos right to hide this from Maria? Should a marriage have this kind of secret, even when the intentions are good? Leave a comment with your thoughts on what will happen at the end of this story, because there's still a lot to discover. And don't forget to download the ebooks I pinned in the first comment, materials that will greatly help you in various areas of life. Over the next few weeks, my perception of the whole situation continued to shift. I even began to admire Carlos, his dedication, and the way he managed to balance two very different lives without harming either. Every Monday he would sneak out, care for Dona Elena for 2 days, take her to appointments, stay with her during treatments, take care of her house, do the shopping, prepare meals, and then he would return home as if nothing had happened, resuming his life as an attentive husband, without letting Maria notice his tiredness, stress, or worry. Imagine the physical and emotional toll this took on him, working all week, caring for his wife and home, and still finding the strength to care for a sick person for 2 days each week. I began to notice details I hadn't noticed before. Carlos was thinner, his dark circles were darker, and he sometimes stood on the porch with a look of profound exhaustion. But whenever Maria appeared, he hid it, smiled, chatted, and pretended everything was fine. One afternoon, I heard him on the phone in the garage, talking very quietly. I managed to catch a few snippets of the conversation. "How's she feeling today? Did the tests arrive? Do I need to buy any more medicine?" He was clearly talking about Dona Elena, probably with some doctor or nurse, closely monitoring her health even when he was away. And the flowers he brought Maria every Wednesday when he returned. Now I understood it wasn't guilt over cheating. It was gratitude. Gratitude for having a wife who didn't have to worry about those problems. For being able to keep her life calm and normal, while he carried that burden alone. On one of my trips to the neighboring town, I had a longer conversation with Donna Elena. I discovered that she had been a nurse for many years, that she had no children of her own, and that she had met Carlos under very special circumstances. She told me that Carlos had fallen ill on the street near her house about 2 years earlier, a high blood pressure crisis, and she had helped him, cared for him, and called an ambulance. Even though she was retired and already experiencing health problems, she used all her medical knowledge to help him. He always says I saved his life that day, Donna Elena told me, her eyes shining. But the truth is, he's been saving mine every day since. That's how their relationship began. Carlos felt eternally grateful for having been helped by a stranger, and when he discovered she was sick and alone, he decided to return the favor by caring for her. At first, he only came on weekends, she continued. But when the treatment got harder, he rearranged his whole life so he could come with me. He said I was like a mother to him. Now I understood why Carlos was talking to Donna Elena about reorganizing his life. He had literally reorganized his routine, his commitments, his schedule, so he could care for the woman who had helped him when he needed it most. But the story became even more touching when Donna Elena revealed a detail I wasn't expecting. He told me that his wife doesn't understand much about illness and hospitals, that she gets very nervous and worried. That's why he prefers not to tell her, so as not to make her anxious. So Carlos wasn't hiding it out of selfishness or cowardice. He knew Maria well enough to know she would be very anxious, very worried, and perhaps even develop some health problem because of the situation. He was protecting his wife from the stress, while also caring for those who needed him. Ladies, this completely changed my perspective on secrets in marriage. Sometimes we think that complete transparency is always the best option, but are there situations where protecting your loved one from certain worries can be an act of love? During all this time observing and investigating, I learned a lot about snap judgments. I was absolutely certain that Carlos was cheating on Maria. I built an entire theory in my head, practically gossiping about a man who was actually an example of kindness and dedication. This made me wonder how often we women jump to wrong conclusions about people, based solely on behavior that strikes us as suspicious. How many relationships have been damaged by unfounded suspicions? How many friendships have been lost due to misunderstandings? Carlos's situation taught me that appearances don't always match reality. Sometimes, seemingly suspicious behavior hides a story of love, sacrifice, and dedication we never imagined. But the story wasn't over yet, girls. The most surprising part was still to come, the one that truly changed my perspective on everything I'd observed during those months. It was a Thursday, as I was returning from the neighboring town after visiting Donna Elena, that I saw something that left me completely speechless. Carlos was arriving home in the middle of the afternoon, outside his usual hours, and he wasn't alone. Girls, when I saw Carlos arriving home in the middle of the afternoon, accompanied by someone, my heart raced again. I thought, now the truth will come out. Maybe he was bringing Donna Elena to meet Maria, or maybe it was someone else entirely who would change everything I'd discovered. I ran to my vantage point at the living room window and carefully opened the crack in the curtain. Carlos was helping someone out of the car, but I couldn't see who it was because of the angle. I could only see that it was a shorter person, walking slowly. When I finally got a clear view, I nearly fell out of my chair. It wasn't Donna Elena. It was an elderly man with completely white hair, leaning on a cane, walking with great difficulty. And from the loving way Carlos helped him, it was obvious they had a close relationship. Carlos practically carried the man to the front door, opened it for him, and they walked in together. I stood there trying to process this new information. Who was this man? Why was Carlos bringing him home now, in broad daylight? About half an hour later, I heard voices on Carlos's porch. He was there talking to the elderly man, and for the first time in months, Maria was also present. The three of them were sitting in porch chairs drinking coffee, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I opened my kitchen window to try to catch some of the conversation, and what I heard left me completely confused. Maria was talking about doctors, treatments, and hospitals with a naturalness that completely contrasted with the negative opinion I'd heard her express weeks before. "Dad," she said, "how were the tests this week? Was the doctor happy with the results?" "Dad, that man was her father. But then why was Carlos taking care of him? Why all that secrecy, all those complicated logistics?" Carlos replied that the treatments were progressing well, that the doctors were optimistic, but that it would still be a long process. Maria agreed, saying the important thing was to be patient and continue following all medical advice. I was completely lost. If that was Maria's father, if she knew about his illness, if she was following his treatment, why did Carlos sneak out every week? Why didn't he talk about it at home? I continued observing the scene on the porch. The elderly man, whom I now knew to be Maria's father, looked tired, but he was smiling, chatting, clearly comfortable there. Carlos was extremely attentive to him, adjusting the chair cushions, offering him more coffee, asking if he was in any pain. And Maria was completely at ease with the situation. Nothing about her indicated surprise or discomfort. On the contrary, she seemed happy to have her father there, chatting with him about everyday matters, asking about his diet, and whether he was taking his medication on schedule. It was then that I heard the man say something that began to clarify everything. "Carlos, my son, I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done. Taking a stubborn old man like me to so many appointments, staying with me during those long treatments, taking care of Elena too. Elena! He mentioned Donna Elena. So there was a connection between all these people that I hadn't noticed before." Maria added, "Dad, you know that Carlos does this with all the love in the world, and taking care of Elena is also important. She was so good to you all these years." Now I was beginning to understand. Donna Elena and Maria's father knew each other. They were probably old friends, or maybe she had been caring for him before Carlos took on that responsibility. The conversation continued, and little by little I began to piece together the puzzle. Maria's father lived in another city, in a nursing home or someplace similar. Donna Elena had been his nurse for a while. They developed a friendship, and when she became ill, Maria's father asked Carlos to care for her as well. "Remember when Elena got sick that time?" the man was saying. "And you rushed home from work to take her to the hospital. I was so worried here alone, but I knew she was in good hands with you." Carlos replied, "Of course I remember, Dad. Elena took care of you for so long, it's the least I can do for her now." "Father! Carlos called you father!" Now everything was making sense. This really was Maria's father. Carlos was the devoted son-in-law who cared for his father-in-law, and a friend of his, and I had spent months creating absurd theories about betrayal and a double life. But one question still remained. If Maria knew everything, if she supported her husband's care, why did Carlos sneak out? Why all that late-night drama, the changing of clothes at the station, the lies? The answer came later in the conversation. Maria said, "Dad, I still feel bad about not being able to help more. You know I get very nervous in hospitals, very anxious about these things about illness. If I went along, I would end up being more of a hindrance than a help." And her father replied, "My daughter, everyone helps as they can. You take care of our house, work to help with the treatment expenses, and keep everything organized so Carlos can dedicate himself to me and Elena. That is already a huge help. There." Now I had the full explanation. Maria really did get very anxious when hospitalized and sick, as Donna Elena had mentioned. So Carlos took on the full responsibility of caring for both his father-in-law and his friend. while Maria contributed in other ways. And why did Carlos sneak out? Probably to avoid waking Maria in the middle of the night, to avoid constantly reminding her of the difficult situation they were facing, to spare her further anxiety and worry. The flowers he brought her every Wednesday? They were a gesture of affection and gratitude for having a wife who understood his responsibilities, who supported his decisions, who took care of everything at home while he dedicated himself to medical care. Carlos wasn't lying out of malice or betrayal. He was being discreet to protect his wife's emotional well-being while fulfilling his obligations as a son-in-law and friend. Girls, can you imagine how I felt at that moment? Months of investigation, conspiracy theories, worrying about poor Maria who was being cheated on, and in fact, she knew everything from the beginning. I spent the entire afternoon reflecting on everything I had witnessed and discovered. How easy it is to draw wrong conclusions when we only observe fragments of other people's lives. How dangerous it is to judge behavior without knowing the full context. Carlos wasn't an unfaithful husband. He was an exceptional son-in-law. Maria wasn't a naive wife being deceived. She was a woman who knew her limitations and found other ways to contribute to the family. Donna Elena wasn't a secret lover. She was a dear friend in need of care. All those logistics that seemed so suspicious to me, the changing of clothes at the gas station, the different cars, the specific schedules, were simply the practical organization of someone who had multiple responsibilities and wanted to fulfill them all in the best way possible. Carlos changed his clothes because his work clothes weren't practical for caring for sick people. He used different cars because his car was in the city where his father-in-law lived. And he used his father-in-law's car to take Donna Elena to the hospitals. His schedules were specific because he had to juggle work with the medical care of two different people. The next day, I couldn't resist talking to Maria. I couldn't pass up the opportunity to definitively clear up all the misunderstandings I'd created in my head. "Maria," I said, "I hope you don't mind me asking, but I've noticed that Carlos leaves very early sometimes. Is everything okay with you two?" She smiled in a way that showed there was no secret or problem. "Oh, Ruth, Carlos is an angel. He takes care of my father and a very dear friend who lives in the neighboring town. He leaves early so he can get there before their doctor's appointments." "And you're not worried about all this running around?" "Of course I am," Maria replied. "But I'm also very proud. How many men would do what he does? Take care of his father-in-law, take care of a lady who isn't even family, organize all the medical logistics and still work and take care of the house. I feel lucky to have a husband like that," she continued. "I tried to help at first, but I discovered that I'm terrible with hospital things. I get nervous, anxious, and end up being more of a hindrance than a help. So we divided the tasks. He takes care of the medical side, I take care of everything here at home and help with the expenses. And you never thought about bringing your father to live here with you?" "We've thought about it, but he doesn't want to leave his city. He has friends, doctors who already know his case. Elena, who is like a sister to him. It would be cruel to take him away from there just for our convenience." I talked with Maria for over an hour, and she told me details of the situation I never would have imagined. Her father had had cancer for over 2 years and was undergoing treatment, but with a good prognosis. Donna Elena had been his nurse at the beginning of his treatment. They became close friends, and when she also became ill, they became companions in the fight against the disease. "Elena is an incredible person," Maria told me. "She took care of my father when he needed it most, and now they take care of each other. She goes with him to appointments. He helps her with the housework. It's a beautiful friendship to see." "And how did Carlos fit into this story?" "Carlos has always been very close to my father, ever since we started dating. When his father became ill, he didn't hesitate for a second to take on the responsibility of overseeing his treatment. And when Elena also needed help, he included her in his care, as if she were family." Maria's eyes shone with emotion as she spoke of her husband. It was obvious she was very proud of his dedication, very fond of the person she had chosen to share her life with. Ruth, I know that sometimes people find it strange that Carlos goes out so much, that he's gone for a few days. But when you see the difference he makes in the lives of these two people that I love so much, you understand that it's worth every sacrifice. And you never felt jealous or suspicious? Maria laughed. Jealous of a 70-year-old woman with cancer. Ruth, if I were jealous of that, I wouldn't deserve to have a husband like Carlos. On the contrary, his care for people who need help only makes me love him even more. I left that conversation completely ashamed of myself. How could I suspect betrayal in such a beautiful story of love, care, and family solidarity? How could I create conspiracy theories about a man who was simply an example of character and dedication? In the days that followed, I observed Carlos with completely different eyes. Every Monday, when I saw him discreetly leaving in the early hours, I thought, there goes an angel caring for people who need him. When I saw him coming home tired on Wednesdays, I thought, how lucky Maria is to have a companion like that. And the flowers he brought? Now I understood that they were a symbol of the love that exists when two people complement each other, when each contributes their best for the common good of the family. A week later, I had the opportunity to meet Maria's father in person. They were on the porch when I passed by, and Maria called me over to talk. Ruth, this is my father, Mr. Antonio. Dad, this is Ruth, our neighbor who I always tell you about. Mr. Antonio was a charming man, full of stories to tell, with an incredible sense of humor despite the difficult situation he was facing. We talked for over an hour, and he told me about his friendship with Donna Elena, about his gratitude for having a son-in-law like Carlos, about how blessed he felt by the way his family rallied to support him. Ruth, he told me, I've been lucky in life. I've raised a wonderful daughter who chose an exceptional man, and I've also gained a friend like Elena, who is like a sister to me. Not everyone can say that in their 70s. A few weeks later, Maria invited me to meet Donna Elena in person. We went together to the neighboring town, and I finally got to see the White House from the inside and talk at length with the woman who had been the center of so many unfounded suspicions. Donna Elena welcomed me like an old friend. She made me delicious coffee, showed me photos from her time as a nurse, and told me moving stories about the patients she had cared for throughout her life. Ruth, she told me, Carlos and Maria are angels in my life. I don't have children. I don't have any close family. If it weren't for them, I would be completely alone facing this disease. They gave me a family. They gave me hope. They gave me reasons to keep fighting. Her home was simple but very cozy, filled with plants, photos, and mementos of a life dedicated to caring for others. And everywhere were small signs of Carlos's presence. His organized medicines, a calendar with his doctor's appointments written in his handwriting, fresh flowers he brought us every week. He cares for me as if I were my own son, Donna Elena continued. But I know he does it out of love for Antonio, too. They have a beautiful friendship. They care for each other. They help each other. Age has come to us both at the same time, but at least we're not facing it alone. I returned from that visit with my heart full of conflicting emotions. On the one hand, a wonderful feeling of having witnessed a true story of love, care, and solidarity. On the other, a profound shame for having doubted, for having suspected, for having created malicious theories about such special people. Girls, this story taught me a lesson I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. We should never judge people based solely on appearances. We should never jump to conclusions about behaviors we don't fully understand. Carlos could have been an unfaithful husband, and I would have been right in my suspicions. But he was exactly the opposite. A man of exceptional character, dedicated to his family, capable of enormous sacrifices for the people he loved. Mary may have been a truly naive wife being deceived, but she was an intelligent woman who knew her limitations and found creative ways to contribute to the well-being of her family. And Donna Elena, who I imagined to be a hidden lover, was in fact a sweet, generous person who had dedicated her entire life to caring for others and who now received back a little of all the love she had planted. Today, whenever I see Carlos leaving in the early hours of Monday morning, I feel a deep admiration for him. How many of us would have the dedication, energy, and generosity to care for two sick people simultaneously, balancing this with work, marriage, and all the other responsibilities of life? And whenever I see Maria, I feel respect for her wisdom in recognizing that we don't have to be good at everything, that we can contribute to the family in different ways, that a marriage works best when each person offers their specific talents. This story completely changed the way I looked at the neighborhood, at the behaviors that seemed suspicious to me, at the conclusions I drew based only on superficial observations. How many times do we women create theories about people without knowing the full reality? How many friendships have we lost due to misunderstandings? How many relationships have we damaged due to unfounded suspicions? From this experience, whenever I see something that seems strange or suspicious in someone's behavior, I prefer to talk to them directly before jumping to any conclusions. I prefer to give the benefit of the doubt before passing judgment, because sometimes what seems like betrayal is actually an act of love. What seems like a lie is actually protection. What seems selfish is actually generosity. The story of Carlos, Maria, and Donna Elena showed me that there are exceptional people all around us, doing incredible things, caring for each other in ways we can't even imagine, and that our obligation as neighbors, as friends, as human beings, is to try to see the best in people before suspecting the worst. Girls, I hope you enjoyed this story as much as I enjoyed experiencing it and sharing it with you. Let me know in the comments what you thought of this twist, if you've ever been in similar situations, or if you've ever jumped to wrong conclusions about someone. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to be notified whenever I post a new neighborhood story. And like this video if it touched your heart in any way. Oh, and don't forget to check out the ebooks I pinned in the first comment. They're incredible resources that can help you in many areas of life, from health and well-being to spirituality and personal growth. Next week, I'll tell you about a new story I observed from my window. And you can be sure that this time, I'll think very carefully before jumping to any hasty conclusions. Until next time, girls. And always remember, the best stories in life are those that surprise us in a positive way, that show us that the world still has a lot of love and kindness, even when we can't see it at first glance. A kiss to all of your hearts.